Hey, everyone.
Hello.
So waiting on a few more folks.
Good evening.
Good evening. Okay. Yeah, I think we might as well go ahead and start. Good evening. Hope everybody had a nice day. Tonight we want to talk a little bit about deer management, and Aaron Shank with the Missouri Department of Conservation is to make a presentation. And Ms. Shank, if you're ready to go, feel free to proceed. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mayor. Let's see. Going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, you should be able to see this now. Mayor, can you give me the thumbs up if that works? Good. Okay, great. So my name's Aaron Shank. I'm the urban wildlife biologist with Missouri Department of Conservation. I've been working with Town and Country since really 2003 or so on deer management questions and issues, but in earnest, working with the city to take action on deer management since about 2009. So I just wanted to give you a history of what has been done in Town and Country, and then lead to my recommendations as far as deer management, the next steps for deer management in order to maintain the population at levels that were previously deemed as kind of goal population densities. So I know there's a lot on this table, but this is a summary of deer management in Town and Country beginning in November of 2009. Of course, there was much effort in planning and deliberation that went into deer management actions prior to 2009, but I've summarized here the actual management actions since then. So I think you can probably see my cursor, but in 2009, here, these are the harvest numbers. So these highlighted numbers here, there we go, reflect the culling efforts. So the sharpshooting efforts that have occurred in Town and Country since 2009. These highlighted numbers here, reflect it's not letting me do it. Okay. Reflect the, here we go. Some other metrics that are important to the city as far as management of deer and the cost that the city has incurred for those management actions. And then finally, these last three rows here reflect the 2 years of sterilization that occurred within the city, where 130 does were captured and sterilized and re-released into the city in 2009 and 2010. I wanted to I'm going to go over this a little bit more and a little bit more visually, but just to kind of clarify what we're talking about here. So total harvest, that's kind of obvious. That's the total number of deer harvested. The females culled are the number of females that were harvested by sharpshooters. So both fawn and yearling adult females. That's an important number to know, because that's really what we are aiming when we have sharpshooters in the field. That's really what they are aiming to harvest, our females or the reproducers within the population, in order to have the greatest impact on future reproductive potential of the herd. Next, you have yearling and adult males culled. So those are essentially antlered males. We cannot in the field tell the difference really between male and female fawns, simply because they don't have enough antler growth at that point in time. So this is just to give you an idea of what portion of that harvest was actually males. Days of field work is the contractor, how many days they actually were in the field. So you can kind of see here, 2011 and 2018 were especially key years for efforts in harvest, and the number of days in the field really reflect that. And then person hours per deer harvested is related to the total cost to the city as well. The recruitment rate refers to the number, and I apologize because well, it doesn't matter, but the recruitment rate refers to the number of fawns per doe that survive to the first breeding season. And so for the purposes of the next slide, I have multiplied that by 100. And I realize as I'm saying this now, I should have edited this table. So this should be 1.6, 1.0, 1.0. So 1.6 fawns per doe, 1 fawn per doe, 1.1 fawn per doe. So typically does will have twin fawns. And the mortality rate of fawns is very high. And statewide, the recruitment rate, so the number of fawns that actually survive to say November, they're born typically late May, early June, and the number of fawns that survive per doe to November is closer to 1.1. In urban areas, we see that recruitment rate is higher, so closer to 1.3 typically. This is going to be easier to look at visually on a graph. So here you can kind of see, and this is where the recruitment rate is going to be a little bit easier to understand here as it's multiplied by 100, which is essentially how many fawns were added to the population that survived until winter. And this yellow line, these darker lines I've made darker on purpose because those are really the key factors here to keep in mind. So the post-management deer density estimate is the number of deer per square mile after management activities were complete within the city. So we started out here in 2009 with about 65 deer per square mile post-management. So after that very first year of management. And in 2020, so this would have been February 2020, pre-COVID, which means there will have been 2 breeding seasons in between 2020 and today. We had reached a level of 21 deer per square mile of town and country. The math is real easy in town and country because you have about 10 square miles of deer habitat or range within the city. So that makes it fairly easy. This dark red line is the total harvest. So you can definitely see here as efforts lag, say in 2012 to 2014. So this was late 2012, then early 2014, even though, so we kind of skip a year here, but in some ways we were just kind of moving into or doing management actions earlier in the year rather than later in the year for fiscal reasons in town and country. But you can see that the density kind of lags behind. So we harvest fewer deer in these years, and then you see that population number jump up. Likewise, we harvest a lot of deer in 2018, and you see that density drop. In addition, I've graphed the deer vehicle collisions per calendar year in town and country here. This is, of course, a really important metric. This is ultimately what the city really wants to reduce, is that risk to motorists and residents on the road. It is really difficult, though, to get that number in any real uniform fashion. So Town and Country does an excellent job of collecting this information with city administration and police as far as deer police reports where we know that deer were struck by vehicles, and then suspected deer vehicle collision reports as well. But again, there's certainly a fairly good margin of error on that number, because we know that there are deer hit on the roads that we don't hear about, or that run off into the woods and, succumb to injury. And so that number, if anything, is underestimated. I took out kind of some of the noise in this slide, just to give you the total harvest, the density of deer in the city, as well as the deer vehicle collisions per year.
Ms. Shank, I'm just curious, what would you consider a reasonable deer density? What number would you say, hey, we're good with 20, or we're good with 15, or
Yep.
What for a suburban area like this, what would you think?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question, Mayor, because there's different ways to think about this, and they're all in terms of carrying capacity. So typically in an urban area, what we're talking about is a carrying capacity of how many deer can the landscape hold before they cause real problems for people. So deer vehicle collisions are at the rate that is unacceptable. Personal or property damage is at a nuisance level. The fear of tick-borne disease and whatnot is on the rise. And anecdotally, that's about 40 deer per square mile. That is based on my experience, as well as a number of other biologists that work throughout North America, in particular in Eastern North America, and what our experience is in working with communities. But there's other ways to think about carrying capacity, and ecologically speaking, the ecological carrying capacity, which is how many deer can the landscape hold before deer really overbrowse the available habitat, where we see detrimental effects on the regeneration of oak and hickory saplings, the survival and reproduction of spring ephemerals and other wildflowers, and then kind of the domino effect down the line as far as the quality of that habitat for invertebrates, so pollinators and other kind of insect life and songbirds and whatnot. So that is about 20 deer per square mile in this part of the country. So above 20 deer per square mile, we start to see an ecologically detrimental effect of deer on the landscape. So throughout our urban areas, that's we're by and large well above 20 deer per square mile. And historically, that probably reflects the densities of deer throughout this part of North America prior to major European settlement. So, pre-1800s and earlier, we likely had between 5 to 20 deer per square mile throughout this area of North America. And our plant life has evolved with that kind of expectation or adaptation, to sustain that amount of deer browse. And of course, deer also spread seeds and whatnot when they browse on plants. So then we also have what we call the biological carrying capacity, which is how many deer can the landscape hold before deer essentially eat themselves out of house and home and starvation sets in. And we really don't know what that is in Missouri. We don't see that. If we see that anywhere, we might be nearing it in Jefferson Barracks, County Park, and Cemetery. That is about as close as I've seen anywhere in the state in my 18 plus years of doing this job, where deer seem to be actually nearing the kind of physical boundaries of their own density. But that could be quite high, much higher than anything we see in West St. Louis County. So I didn't answer your question directly, but essentially 20 deer per square mile, you're going to see detrimental effects to the ecology of your natural areas. 40 deer per square mile, you're really going to see conflicts with deer and people.
And I'm not a hunter, but I think I've read in the state, there's don't know, between 1.5 and 2 million deer in the state as a whole. Is that roughly about right?
Probably closer to about 1.5. Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And that's likely higher than what was here historically. Deer are really a conservation success story from being nearly extirpated from the state.
Actually, I think I read an article once, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in the 1930s in this state, if you found deer tracks, much less see a deer, that was a big deal because the number in this state was very, very small at that time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, 90 years ago, we probably had about 400 deer left in the entire state.
Wow.
So between regulatory changes being the main kind of mechanism here of control and shutting down harvests for a number of decades to allow the population to rebound, and some restocking efforts, but the deer population is abundant and healthy now.
Thank you.
Yep. So with this information, then we get to kind of my recommendations, and I'm going to tell you what my recommendations are, but first I'm going to go over how I got to those. The last management in Town and Country was early February of 2020. So about a year and a half ago. And since then, there's been 2 breeding seasons that have occurred. So deer typically breed in November. Mid-December is the peak of the breeding season for deer, and fawns are born in late May, early June. So we've had 2 of those occur since any management occurred in Town and Country. So I've had to make some assumptions, is my point, on how to make recommendations based on what we think has happened within the population in Town and Country. And I've made those assumptions based on the best information that we have. So the post-management population survey, which was done in February 2020, estimated 206 deer in those 10 square miles of deer habitat west of 270 in Town and Country. We're assuming the demographic of that population reflects historically what we have typically or on average found, which is about 35% reproducing females, 35% fawns, and about 30% yearling and adult males. I have made the assumption that about 4% of the reproducing part of that population is sterilized does that have that are still surviving from the 2009-2010 efforts. So that impacts the reproductive potential. So I have accounted for that here. On average in Town and Country, 1.3% recruitment of fawns, so 1.3 fawns per doe surviving to breeding season is a reasonable assumption, and I've assumed that for both years. I've also assumed about a 10% mortality population-wide. So this does not include that fawn mortality, but anything beyond the fawns from November on, so that would include deer vehicle collisions or disease, tooth abscesses, fences, some of those common causes of mortality throughout the population. In addition, as you're probably aware, Queenie Park saw its first managed archery deer hunt in November 2020, and they will have another archery deer hunt again this November 2021. And the deer harvest in 2020 was 30 deer. So what I did was just assume we're going to have the same harvest this year. That's a big jump in assumption, but that's the best information I have to go on. And I assumed that 30% of those deer were counted in the 2020 survey of February. So based on that, I estimate the deer population in December 2020 to be about 250 deer, which would give us, about 306 or 30.6 deer per square mile in December 2021. So in order to maintain the population closer to 25 deer per square mile, I recommend that the city cull at least 50 deer from the population. I have recommended that our agency, if requested, issue a permit to take 75 deer. If the city is going to cull deer with hired sharpshooters. At a population of 250, the city would likely add an additional 100 fawns. So this spring, if you take it, and that would be after management. So assuming there were at least 50 deer culled and you were able to maintain a population of 25 deer per square mile or 250 deer within those 10 square miles, and then 100 fawns were added in the spring, bringing the population to about 350. So then the options, which I think is probably the bulk of our conversation here today, include either sharpshooting, which is the strategy that has been employed since 2009, utilizing white buffalo, but with a permit from Department of Conservation to bait and shoot deer over bait piles, or archery hunting during the statewide season. Our archery season runs from September 15th to January 15th annually. That would occur on private property, as well as the managed hunt in Queenie Park. I know that's not in Town and Country, but certainly has an impact here on the discussion, or some sort of combination of these options. So that concludes my information, and I'm happy to.
Quick question, if I could, again, not being a hunter, but what are the odds or possibilities that with archery that a deer could be wounded, but could then continue to run or stagger or whatever onto maybe some families out having a barbecue in the backyard, and this deer shows up, kind of drops dead in their backyard. I mean, I know that's sort of far-fetched, but I wonder about how fast, if you hunt with a bow and arrow, is there that possibility that it's not a clean shot, that this deer could end up in a residential neighborhood? I'm just curious, frankly.
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility. And I've worked with a number of area communities that do utilize archery hunting, and I'm always very frank about that, as well as with our managed deer hunts that occur in St. Louis County parks and a number of state properties in suburban areas. It will happen at some point in time that a deer is injured by an arrow and runs off the property and dies, or needs, is essentially dies on somebody's property that that hunter does not have permission to retrieve it. So that's something that in communities that are utilizing archery hunting as their primary method for harvesting deer, they need to know exactly what the process is and make sure everybody's on the same page of what, not if it happens, but when it happens.
Okay.
What is the procedure? And typically that is, hunters should not be making contact with other landowners. The local police should be involved at that point in order to knock on doors and or knock on a door and ask permission to retrieve. And in no cases does retrieving a deer permit someone to trespass. But typically folks will want that deer to be harvested if it's been mortally wounded, and so that meat can go to good use. But that's something that if the city is considering archery hunting, absolutely there should be a protocol in place to deal with those types of situations when they arise.
Thanks. I feel I've monopolized the questions. Any of the members of the Board of Aldermen have questions for Ms. Shank? Alderman Whitmire.
Yes, Ms. Shank, thank you very much for coming tonight. Appreciate your being here. So my question is, the surrounding neighborhoods to Town and Country, are they maintaining management of their herds as well? That balance that, anyway, I'll leave it there.
Yep. Yeah, that certainly impacts what happens in Town and Country. So I understand the question. Creve Coeur allows for archery hunting. I believe it's don't quote me on this, but I believe it's 2 acres or more of property, or the combination of properties to meet that acreage requirement. Chesterfield allows for archery hunting as well. Their acreage requirement is significantly smaller. It's a quarter of an acre. And let's see, Manchester allows for archery hunting. They actually always have. They never restricted archery hunting. They simply don't have very many properties where that can really be utilized, but they are attempting hunting on some city-owned properties like Schrader Park and another park that I'm trying to blank on the name right now. But they are attempting some city kind of organized hunts. Those are not part of our statewide managed hunt system, but they're administered by the city. And then De Pere is doesn't allow archery hunting on private property, but they do host a managed archery hunt at Phantom Forest and Bittersweet Woods, which is just south of Manchester Road along Barrett Station Road. It's about 33 acres of green space, and we work with them to administer that managed hunt there on those 33 acres.
And do those cities have other sharpshooting activities as well, or just archery?
No, the other city that has done sharpshooting is the city of Ellisville, but they have taken a different kind of approach than Town and Country and have utilized their police to do that, but have not been nearly as successful or efficient with those efforts.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Well, Shank, I appreciate it, taking the time and for the information. Thank you very much.
Sure, no problem. If there's questions or anything I can provide, certainly, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. And I think we're 2 or 3 minutes from starting at 7. So we'll, I think we have to sign off this too, and then come back on board, and we will hopefully start our meeting right at 7. Thank you.